Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is showtime. Ryan,
Showtime. That's my middle name.
That's your middle name?
I forgot my mic.
I know. All of a sudden, we were beginning, and I said, "Oh, Mike."
Yeah.
Swung it over. We didn't have to say anything.
This weekend, I was our first two services. All three of them I did the call to worship, but the first two I totally botched it. So yeah, Showtime. That's a good nickname.
Let's see. Which one did you not bring the microphone up?
The first one, I was up on our balcony talking with people about why they were sitting in the balcony and whether or not it was because they wanted to wear the mask or they liked the view better.
Yeah.
And then I looked at my watch as the prelude was coming to a close. And I'm like, oh no, I'm doing call to worship today. I ran down the stairs, grabbed my Bible, call to worship ended, and I ran up on stage and we had the announcement video that was going before me. So I was standing up there and shouldn't have been. And then second service, I was joking with the team and I'm like, I'm going to get it right this time. And I was there in the right spot and I forgot to put my mic on. Third time is a charm.
I was outside in the courtyard and I texted Daniel, something's wrong. Like, did you turn off?
He's like, it's Ryan. He's an idiot.
Ryan forgot his mic.
Oh man!
So the online
down my back.
The online people didn't know what you said. So if you're out there and you were watching the 1045 service, now's your chance to hear what he said.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
Yeah. Psalm 107, 28 through 32.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, that was the call to worship. So, I always take it off when I'm praying with people just in case it's on, and you don't want to either go Naked Gun on a prayer request. You remember Naked Gun when Leslie Nielsen has the mic on and he's going to the bathroom and everybody hears it. I don't want to be praying for somebody in like an intimate moment and have it be broadcast. And so I always drop it down my back. And
because that's the other thing. Daniel doesn't let you mute it anymore.
Nope, can't mute it.
No, he has taken control from you. And so clearly,
evidently for good reason,
you took control back by leaving it.
Dang it.
Where he can't do anything to help fix it.
There's just some days where you just aren't quite hitting on all cylinders. And that was one of those days. So
that is great.
The Lord used it though.
It's
all good. It's all good.
All right. Well, we're at a slightly different time again.
We are.
And we're, summer is going to be summer. I know you're out of town a bunch. I'm going to be gone next week. And so, we're going to be, potentially a little bit more hit and miss. We might bring in some guests to talk through some things every now and again, but things will be a little bit different. We've got the Jello Wars going on right now. So our kids are off at junior high. By the way, my kid is up at Hume Lake right now.
Hume Lake, yes.
Oh my goodness, you guys. If you know anything about that, be praying for Hume Lake, please. I know I am praying more for Hume Lake now. I think maybe more than when I actually took kids up there. Now that I shouldn't admit that. Yeah, but my kid is
your
there,
son
so
up
it's
there.
Different.
Yes,
it's a different
totally
kind of praying. And so there you have it.
Yep.
But we got kids doing Jello Wars. Do you know what that is, by the way?
No, I have no idea. I just know that my car is probably going to be destroyed on the way home. I'll take a few boys home. So
yes. Okay. I know enough to give you the gist that the interns, so the summer interns for junior high, all day today, they were making Jello.
Right on.
They make vats and
on.
I believe it's multiple trash can fulls of Jello, which what better way for an intern to spend their day?
I love it.
Because what they're doing is they're making dreams come true for junior hires, because they get to go out and it's all 4 different colors and the kids wear white t-shirts.
Yep.
And then they just get to go and throw Jello at each other for a couple
hours.
Awesome. It is awesome.
Kelly and I were talking about it tonight, and we're just saying, where else would you be able to do that?
That's a great point.
It's just nowhere else. It's just not going to happen. You either do it at youth group or you don't do it.
I know.
So I'm glad they're doing it.
I know. That's one I never did.
I didn't either.
I know. So there was no interns that made me vats of Jello. And so thank you to all interns everywhere.
Yes,
I think that's pretty cool. Here we are. I'm about to just share this on Facebook, while we're going here. But as always, we love it when you jump in. when you say hi on the feed, whether you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook, it gives us a chance to interact a little bit and to see what's going on with you. But if you're joining us on the podcast, of course, there's no interaction. You get to listen at double speed.
Yeah.
Which,
and I'm sure you are.
I'm sure you are. Oh, at times.
If you're watching live though, we'd love to get your questions, and you can just put those in the comment feed or send them in to questions@efcc.org. If you have anything, really, any
That's
question,
right.
Nothing's off limits, theology, personal, church stuff, whatever. Josh and I are willing to talk about it.
That's right. We're going to try. And so, my wife says hello, or she's at least gives me a heart.
She's sending her love. It was probably when you're talking about Caleb.
That's right. That probably was. It wasn't for me. That was
Yeah.
for Caleb, wasn't it, hon? Yep. And Connie. Hello, Connie. Good to see you. And then Carolyn. We've got Carolyn and Connie. You guys are just coming through for us. Yes. We love you too.
We do.
You guys are awesome. So good to see you. Patty is saying hello.
Hi, Patty.
Who cut your hair? Is what she's asking. No one has cut mine in a while.
Dave the barber.
Dave the barber did, though. I mean, a while ago.
Josh and I both go to the same guy. This show is sponsored by Dave the barber.
Oh, Dave, we love you, man.
We do. We do.
That is hilarious. You said anything? I think that's a question. In a nice way. In a nice way. And all right, cool. Well, okay, so we're going to dive in. Like always, we're going to jump into the last sermon. So if you haven't listened to that, you can pause right now and you can go to our website at efcc.org. You can, I think maybe /sermons, or there's a sermon link, or you can go to the other podcast link and listen to last week's sermons. It was called
Storms in Strength.
Storms in Strength. And Strength.
Yeah.
We're looking at the book of Acts. This is the last of
the last not so new, not so normal.
Not so new, not so normal.
Yeah. So I'm sort of bummed the series is coming to an end. I really enjoyed teaching through portions of the book of Acts. I taught through the entire book maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. And it was, I think, 34 messages. So to just do, what do we do? 8, 9, 10?
Is it 9? Yeah, something like that.
If you include the one that you did on Ascension, the one that I did on the Spirit. Yeah. So, it felt like we were just starting to scratch the surface of the book of Acts, but that was sort of the intention, was to pick out a few points, sort of parachute in and say, what can we learn about the early church and how they were a peculiar people. Yeah. They were different. And, I think we saw that again in this passage in Acts 27.
Yeah.
So if you've read through the book of Acts sort of is moving at pretty quick speed up until about chapter 22. And chapter 22, it comes, I'm not to a screeching halt per se, but it starts to follow Paul and his trials and jail experiences. And so this is the last one. And he's on his way to see Caesar, to have a trial before Caesar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, okay. You began this message. I thought it was a funny way to begin talking about 80s TV shows, right?
80s TV shows.
Man. And I think you did say that they don't make them like they used to.
They don't make them like they used to.
Is that the pinnacle of TV experience right there?
I don't know. I don't know if it's the 80s or the 90s. I can just tell you it's not now.
It's not now.
That's all I'm sure of.
Okay, good. Yeah.
There's some decent shows now.
but you made a bold claim. This claim.
Was it about Tom Selleck's mustache?
Well, that
still hasn't stopped.
I mean, no, that is like obviously true.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
But you made a claim about God, that God is like MacGyver.
God is like MacGyver.
He's like MacGyver.
Yeah.
He takes something and like repurposes it. Unexpected, something completely wild, unexpected.
And uses it in order to grow us and shape us and help us be formed into the image of Christ. And God is like MacGyver.
And I got to thinking about that a little bit, that God is I'm going to do this. God is like MacGyver. Yes, you're right. But I want to suggest that God is also like Mr. T.
Okay.
You know, because God pities a fool like me. And then I pity the fool. All right. And I want to suggest that God is also like Michael Knight. Yes, the Knight Rider.
The Knight Rider.
You realize in the beginning line, it says, now it also says that he's a young loner. Okay, God's not a young loner, but he's on a crusade to champion the cause of the innocent, the helpless, and the powerless in the world.
This is Luke 4,
this
right?
Is, I know. So the more I thought about it, the more God is like quite a few 80s TV stars. That's what you triggered in my mind.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could help.
Oh, goodness.
No, but I think my hope is that people start, use a dumb illustration like that. You get what you ask for, right? But that people really did start to think about God's creative work in their life.
Yes.
And I think we typically just assume that God's going to work directly and that we're always going to know what he's doing and that he's going to go about it in a way that makes sense.
Yes.
And because God is logical. And yet I would suggest to people that God is far more creative than we often give him credit for, not only in speaking the world into existence. Obviously that was a creative act, but that he often grows us in ways where we don't expect.
Yeah.
Right. We look back and we go, oh man, Lord, you stretched me, you grew me. And it was in a way that I never would have imagined or dreamed up on my own.
Yeah.
And I think that was my hope, is that people would start to go, I've seen that in my life. I've seen
Absolutely.
God do that in my life.
Absolutely. No. And you definitely did that. You got me thinking about more than Mr. T.
I mean, I went pretty quick from, God is like MacGyver to a woman named Jane telling me that cancer was the best thing that ever happened to her.
Yeah.
And so
I
wanted to create some cognitive dissonance for
Yes.
people. Right. I remember that conversation vividly. She was a friend of, she was the mom of a friend of mine, and she had started coming to South Fellowship Church, and God had just done a great work in her life. And I can remember her sitting in my office saying, yeah, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the thing God used in order to get her attention and really start to soften her heart and woo her to himself. So yeah.
That is crazy. It sounds crazy to someone who hasn't experienced that, because we look at it and everybody would, any human would look with such compassion and we want to say, I'm so sorry for you. And that's true. And yet that can be fully true. At the same time, they can see something amazing out of it.
Yeah. The MacGyver
God.
Using even that. Yeah. So that was because the framework is that we wanted to come to Acts 27 with was, well, God's at work in this shipwreck.
Yeah.
And we went through a few reasons that the shipwreck happened. And, there's a number, and I love the way that Luke sort of lays these out, that you can't blame it on any one thing, right? It's nature. There's storms in the season. It's arrogance. They think they can make it. It's deception, this wind that's blowing. They listen to bad advice. And yet it's all those things put together that causes the shipwreck. And, I think the same thing happens in our life, that you can't always figure out why the storm comes. And sometimes it's very obvious, but other times it's not. And that's not even the point, though, is why the storm comes. We always want to know why, right? And what I've found in my life is that God isn't quite as interested in answering that question. And he's more interested in what it looks like to shape and form our soul through the storm than answering the question, why did he allow the storm?
That's a great observation. In fact, we just don't get many of the whys.
Oh gosh.
Very, very rarely. And even I would suggest in that the woman who came to you and said that this is the best thing that's happened to her. I would also suggest, though, that wasn't the why necessarily, right? Because it wasn't as if God was sitting up in heaven. That God doesn't necessarily sit up in heaven, but it wasn't there thinking to himself, I know what will get her.
Right.
I know. I got it. I'm going to give her cancer.
Yeah. No.
Or, or because even worse, people talk about like, going through a loss of a loved one. And then that being the moment, that being the thing that triggered them. And God's not up there striking people with disease. He's not killing people in order to get your attention, to get our attention. And yet, at the very same time, there's good coming out of it.
He's creative.
He's creative.
Even within that, he's working for our good, as the scriptures would say.
So he's taking what's there already, in a sense, right? So it's not like he went out and found cancer like a MacGyver, okay,
right,
and said, I'm going to now put this on you.
Right.
It's more of, okay, you've got cancer. Okay. Not you, someone here has cancer, and God's saying, well, let me see if I can take that and MacGyver that.
Use even
into
that.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
And so this analogy of the storms, it can be lots of things, right? I mean, cancer's one, but it can be even smaller things.
Totally. I mean, I think it can be, we can talk about the big things, right? The death, the cancer, even like depression, anxiety, that can be a storm for people. Challenging financial situations, that can be a storm for people. But even, smaller day-to-day just struggles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a fitting, in a sense, metaphor for,
I had a whole section where I wanted to walk through the way that songs use those as storms as metaphors. There's some, I forget, there's some meme going around that basically said, if you want to write a Christian song, just start with the storm metaphor and work your way from there. Right.
Yeah, that's good.
Oceans but even like older hymns, right? Like it is well with my soul when sorrows like sea billows roll.
Yeah.
The storms are, a great analogy for challenges in life.
Yeah. Pardon me for a second, because
this brought to you by Dave the Barber and
Dave the Barber, and I know I've got mine.
Spindrift.
I was gonna bring water, but I just remembered how you always open one, so I thought I'm bringing a limoncello. LaCroix.
You're classy.
Thank you very much. What are you sipping on today?
Spindrift.
It's a Spindrift.
It's a Spindrift.
And what's the flavor there?
That's orange mango.
Okay.
Cheers.
Here you go.
Cheers.
Let's not make that a thing. I won't make that a thing. We'll stop right there. It seemed like the appropriate, which is often the inappropriate time.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is so. Okay, so we've got storms. Sometimes, as Carolyn said, storms can just be an accumulation of annoyances.
Oh, that's so true.
And sometimes the little things become the big things.
Yeah,
and in life, and that
they do.
But so we've all experienced that.
Yep.
And so what you're suggesting is that whether it be these big life-changing things, okay, because those are better illustrations.
Yeah.
Let's just face it, right?
They are.
Not all of us have dealt with cancer. Not all of us have dealt with those big things.
I mean, COVID was a storm.
Yeah.
But then, we can get underneath that too and go, gosh, figuring out how to care for our kids well. That was a storm. Trying to figure out how to stay emotionally healthy. There were some storms there. Physical, so I think there was, we've come through a season that was tumultuous and stormy on a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
So I think
absolutely
it fits for our time period.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to point out, because I think it's easy to say, well, God is at work in the midst of the storms. But to me, it's far more interesting to try to tease out, how is God at work in the midst of the storms? Because I think sometimes in Christian circles, we talk a little bit in too many generalities to actually be helpful for people. So God's at work. Like, okay, just trust that God's at work. And what I really wanted to do in this message was to say, how is God at work in the midst of the storm? And so as I read through this passage of scripture, there was a number of things that I saw, but there were three things that really stood out to me. The first was that scene where they start to throw all the tackle and some of the things on the deck of the ship overboard. And I thought, well, that's the way the storm works, right? Like I use the example of if you get in a car accident, you hug your kids a little bit tighter, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you lose a job, you make a budget, right? The storm clarifies our priorities for us, and in an almost divinely inspired way allows us to see with clarity the things that are actually really important to us in life. And it's so easy to walk through life with blinders on to what's really important. I mean, the studies about people getting to the end of their lives and going, gosh, nobody gets to the end of their life and says, I wish I would have spent more time at work.
Yeah.
And so
I wish I would have bought more toys.
Wish I would have bought more toys. Wish I would have got that newer boat. Nobody gets to the end and says those kind of things. And yet those are often the types of narratives and stories that we're living and in.
That's right.
And storms are the great disruptor to those. And we start to look at the things on the deck of our ship and go, well, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and so one of the, and one of the things I think we ought to do is fill in the story a little bit more, because what Paul is doing, what's he doing on that boat in the first place?
He's a prisoner.
Right? So here's a storm that he definitely didn't choose.
It's a storm within a storm.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. There's a storm of him getting put in prison, which he shouldn't have been.
Right.
So he's being persecuted there. He was unjustly in prison. And then he's in a storm that he had the foresight to tell them, guys, you shouldn't go on this. You shouldn't start.
Not a good idea, fellas.
The weather's not looking good. I mean, not even that, but it was just, he sensed from God, this is not going to turn out good. He did his part. He heard from God somehow, did his part, and they still went out on the storm.
Right.
So he knew something was going to go bad.
He did.
And sure enough, they're on a prison boat, so he's guarded. It seems like in the passage there's guards, and then there's the people who work on the boat.
Right.
There's like two different groups.
Yep.
And then there's the prisoners who are tied up for seemingly most of the time.
They are. Yeah.
And so it seems like that's where Paul is.
Yep.
No control over the storm at all.
None.
Even he wants control in a sense, or at least he's got the right idea, but that's taken away from him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting part, if you read through the entire chapter, there's this shift that starts to happen where I think this is another thing the storm does. It allows people to rise up in leadership. It gives people an opportunity to step into maybe a divine calling.
Absolutely.
If I had another 15 minutes and were to preach it again, I would probably try to push into that a little bit and go, like, storms actually create an avenue for people to step up and lead in unique ways. They create open seats in leadership because you need people to step in and to give hope.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Paul does. And I think in the midst of the storm, the leaders that emerge are the leaders that speak words of hope. And that's exactly what Paul starts to do. He gives direction, very practical, but he also gives hope. And his hope is always centered on the person and work of Jesus.
So that's good. That's good. And so it clarifies.
Yeah, clarifies priorities.
Yes.
The second thing the storm does is it determines our direction. So one of the things that was interesting to me was the way that Luke tells us the sun and the stars are blacked out. So for an ancient sailor, your GPS is gone.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're driven along. The picture is they're not getting to choose where they go.
Yeah.
And I think that's the nature of the storm. That's one of the reasons the storms are so terrifying, is because we don't know where we're going to be at the end of the storm. And we're used to knowing where we're going to be. We're used to having control enough of our lives to say, this is where I'm going. This is what I'm doing. These are the decisions I make. And this is where these decisions are probably going to lead.
Yeah.
And the storms, they take all of those things away from us.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So like if you're sick, cancer can leave you in a number of different places, right? Can leave you dependent on medical treatment for the rest of your life. And that's a direction.
That's a direction
that you are, right? It can, it can lead you, it can lead to your death.
Yeah.
And that's a direction. I mean, there's so many, and it can lead to your healing.
Yeah.
And a new perspective.
I just got a message from a couple within our church who husband was laid off during COVID and they found a new job. It's back east. And so their family's moving, right? And that's a very definitive, the storm caused a new direction. It wasn't something they chose. It wasn't something that they necessarily wanted, but in the storm, you're driven along and you have to decide, all right, how am I going to respond? And what does it look like to have faith in the midst of the challenge there? So it determines our direction. Yeah. And I used I'm going to limit myself to once a year on this quote, but this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And surprisingly for our audience here, it is not by Dallas Willard.
Yes, exactly. I know. It is by, quite possibly one of the greatest, and happens to be 80s musician.
80s.
By the way, the greatest 80s musician.
Totally. Oh, great singer-songwriter. Yeah. So Rich Mullins said, he's talking to God, I don't know where you're leading me unless you've led me here where I'm lost enough to let myself be led. Yeah. And the first time I heard that line, I was just like, yes. Like that is so true, that we want God to have control in theory. Yeah. But in practice, it takes a storm for us to actually let go and say, I guess I don't have as much control as I thought I did.
To recognize that we're that lost.
Yeah.
Right. I love that, because it's got the direction in there, that he's lost his direction. Right. He's so lost that he's got to stop and say, I'm not going to get anywhere.
Right.
I'm going to die here.
Yeah.
Because that's how lost I am. I'm lost enough to let myself be led.
Yes.
I just love that. And
such a good line.
And I love the picture of that like the whole time God's been like, I'll lead you. Right. Like Jesus is like, come on, I'm ready to lead whenever you are there.
How about now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's
How
right.
about now?
That's where a lot of us, I think even, oh man, I'm sure at times that's my life.
Oh,
that
gosh.
I'm sure I go, no, I got this, God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even in the storms, I think sometimes we're like, he says, how about now?
Yeah. Yeah. As if that's something that's a constant, constantly saying, all right, God, I need you to lead.
Right.
I do think that's interesting that we can do that. So Christians can do that. We can continue to kind of try to lead ourselves under our own power and our own strength. And it takes us getting turned around in a storm,
right?
Getting so lost that we just stop and say, all right, I need to let you lead.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that's part of, as we people that study change and what allows people to really change and grow. We had this theory on our backpacking trips that really we wanted students to start to feel that sense of dependency. That's when we saw God start to transform lives.
Yes.
I even think of our students up at Hume, right? They're taken away from so many of the things that they cling to for control, and they're more open to hearing from God.
Yeah.
It seems like that's human nature in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
That we need those interruptions in order to open our ears and our heart to what God would want to say to us.
Did you guys backpacking with Young Life? Did you guys do solo days?
We did solo days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd send students off.
Yeah. Now, I mean, like, I can't, I guess I'm older now, and I've been through enough storms to know that they come, right? That's a hard one to believe that we did.
I know. It's so true. So we would go, and I did the same. This is where I went as a student and did it. Where we'd send, people like this would send the students off to go and be solo for depending on the weather and everything, but up to 24 hours.
Yeah, it would
That's
be a
usually
night.
8.
It was like from dawn until dusk.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like right as it started to get dark, we'd
Yeah.
eat together. Or no, actually, they'd be out there before we ate. We would bring food
Drop off
around
food.
to every camper
Yep.
and pray for them and just ask God to bless their time. And oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so we'd just be alone and in the woods. And that it really was. Yeah. I don't know if they do that anymore. That's what you're getting at, right?
I don't know. Maybe they do, man.
Maybe they do, but it seems like a pretty crazy thing.
It does. It does.
You know, once I took 30 junior high students backpacking for an entire week.
I don't even think that's legal.
That's not. I don't think it was then. But that's the kind of things that we used to do. Anyway, that's a different story. But those experiences, and I gotta experiencing Hume Lake.
Yeah.
Through the lens of my son, 14-year-old kid who just hasn't done much on his own yet. You know, he just doesn't know. I mean, he barely knows how to order his own like food at a fast food place, and he's got to go do that. I mean, all these little things. These experiences are huge in kids' lives to step out into their own, and what a great experience, and that's a lot of what, in a sense, these storms do.
They do
in our life.
Yeah.
Any storm of any kind can put us in a place where, as Rich said, we have to let him lead.
Yeah.
It's just out of the cards to do it on our own.
Yeah.
Those are good things.
I think this echoes C.S. Lewis's famous quote. I'll paraphrase it. It says something to the effect of that God whispers in our pleasures, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf and dying world.
Yeah.
That's often the way that God gets our attention.
Absolutely.
Hey, will you put
Absolutely.
Gwen's comment up?
Yep. Because Gwen takes this, I love, this is great. Slightly different, as she says, another spin on this topic. Sometimes we are put in or born into a storm that was created by other people, and we need God's hand to calm the storm and guide us through it toward health and healing. Lost enough to let my life be led.
That is so good. Yeah.
And that's a great point, that storms can come from hurtful people who have who've done something to us, who have made bad decisions. And a lot of people go through storms in life because of what their parents have done to them. Some people go through storms of abuse from someone else, from even a family member or a friend or a stranger. Those are huge. In fact, most storms like that come from evil of some sort.
Right. Sin, evil.
And I think that's the common denominator, in a sense, that it may not be, like a sickness, like cancer. That's not a personal evil. No one did that. No one did anything to deserve.
That's the nature
that.
one, right?
That's the nature one. Exactly.
Yeah.
In a sense, or it's the fallen nature, maybe, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. That's the world that we live in.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. I mean, a pandemic is like that,
Mm-hmm.
that it's no one's fault. It's just has happened. But like, I think of like an earthquake or something like that too, that is just, it's out of our control. And in the same way though, and this gets trickier to see, that a personal sin is out of our control. And I think that's something that can get difficult in this. And so Gwen, I just want to say that I hear you there, but know this, that any person out there who has been hurt personally by somebody, that it's hard to recognize that it's not your fault.
Right.
People, I think, and that's a hard thing to distinguish, because oftentimes if it's someone who is known, people can live with a sense of like, I should have done something different, or I could have, or it as if it's my fault. And that's just difficult. But I think that the point is that this is out of your control, and this is that all storms like that are. And I think it's important just to point out that whatever that thing has happened, we're not saying that God was using that person that God, chose that person to do any of those things. But even that, God can MacGyver.
Yeah.
God can take it.
Absolutely.
And I see that in so many people.
Yeah,
for sure. So
yeah, I mean, I think that it's a sobering reality to acknowledge that that our choices and sin have the ability to create storms in the lives of others.
Ooh.
And we see this all throughout the scriptures, right? Whether it's Achan's sin or, we read the story of Jonah through Jonah's eyes and Jonah's lens, but I often wonder about these other people on that ship where they're going, who's this dude's fault that we're experiencing all this, right?
Yes.
And I think we resonate with that because we go, yeah, there's that's a distinct part of life that is unfair and doesn't make sense sometimes and is a challenge. But I love what Gwen said last, where she said, guides us through towards health and healing, lost enough to let myself be led. That there's this, like, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility to pursue Jesus and do whatever I can to be healthy. Yeah. And that's one of the things I respect a ton about Gwen.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
absolutely. That's good.
The last thing was that we pointed out Paul comes and he's like, you guys, an angel spoke to me. This is a guy they wouldn't listen to about weather reports, right?
Exactly.
And they wouldn't listen to about, it's really not a good time to travel. They're like, thanks, buddy. Right.
Yeah. Sure. What do you
know?
But
when he comes and says an angel spoke to me, because there's a storm and they're terrified, they go, you know what? We'd like to hear more.
Yes.
I love that. And then there's just all these funny lines. Like, Josh, I don't know if people thought this was as funny as I did.
Okay.
That happens sometimes to preachers where you go, this is funny. I suggested that our women's ministry should maybe adopt verse 21 of Acts 27 as their motto. It says, men, you should have listened to me. I just thought that'd be fun. Like t-shirts, mugs.
I thought it was
hilarious. It's biblical.
It is biblical.
Men, it's just like, you should have listened to me.
We're here saying we know.
We get it.
We should have.
We get it.
That's so funny.
Maybe Mother's Day gifts next year. But then he says, hey, good news. Nobody's going to die, but the boat, it's going to die.
It's not going to end well for the boat.
I've just wondered, is this good news or bad news? I think it's both. So anyway, and then, so Paul gives this impassioned plea for them to really take heart, have faith, and they do.
Yes, exactly.
So I was just struck by the fact that, and I think, as I preached this 3 times on Sunday, really the last time I preached, I went, that was sort of, I felt like there's a nugget there the whole time that I was finally able to go give language to in the way I wanted to. And that happens sometimes, doesn't it? Where you go, I'm preaching this one way and going, I just feel like there's another layer here that for whatever reason, I just haven't given language to yet. Mm-hmm. And at the 5 o'clock service I did, and I talked about how when life is good, when it's smooth sailing, as it were, God's promises are really nice.
Yes.
During a storm, God's promises become necessary.
Yeah.
And there's a difference there between them being sort of an anecdotal addition to life. Yeah. But then in the storm, they become central to life. So you see that happen where Paul starts to point out the promises of God and the sailors are going, okay, yes.
It's like, I feel like I've seen this in students. I saw this in students for years, as their development of their faith journey, in a sense, right? As I got to watch students, as come in as eighth graders, really, right? They come into a high school ministry as these kids, and then they leave as looking like adults, right?
Yeah,
sometimes acting like them, but they leave as 18, and you see them make decisions. You see them put their faith in Jesus. So they'll tell you, I trusted Jesus. They say, I believe. They'll write all the right things. They'll say all the right things. They'll believe the promises.
Yeah.
Right. They're there for them. But you get them to go off to somewhere. So, we would take them on a missions trip. And, they're about 17 years old. This is between their junior and senior year. They'd go on a missions trip. And after the missions trip, when they tell their testimony, they tell their story, there would be, so many of them would, a year later would say, I think I really became a Christian in Albania.
Yeah.
Or, in China, these places that we'd go. And I'd think to myself, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
You told me long before that you believed in Jesus, but that put them in a storm. It put them in an opportunity that they needed to trust God.
So
in
what
a way
do
they never did?
If you were to say, I don't think that's what you really mean. What you mean is this. How would you give language to what they really mean?
I think what they're getting at is that idea that they realize that the promises of God are necessary for them. It is like, I own them. They're really mine.
Yeah.
It was then that they realized, oh, this deserves all of me. Not just, I believe it.
Right.
And that's a big difference when and so many people I think are walking around with like, I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course I believe in Jesus, but are they invested in this so much so that they would, they would allow themselves to be led?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the time I think where they decided, oh, I need to be led.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you have students that wanted to get like baptized again?
Absolutely.
Also?
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Absolutely. I got to baptize a few kids in Albania in the Ionian Sea.
Oh, really?
And I'm pretty sure it's a place that Paul stopped. I don't know that for sure, but it just seems like it would be. Me and Paul, we baptized in the same place.
Seems like it would be.
Just kidding.
Yeah. I like that.
In one of the observations, I got to one of the devotionals. I think it's coming out on Friday. One of my observations from this passage had to do with this prayer, and it's related to this that those men. So they finally listen to Paul, and in verse 29 it says, "And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come." And so here they are, they're praying.
Right.
That's great. But I just thought it was a funny concept of praying for day to come.
Oh, that is,
because and that's a phrase, and I get it. That's maybe where we get this phrase, because that's what it says, that they were praying for day to come. And it's funny to me that that's a prayer that they know was going to be answered.
Yeah.
There's no possibility
God would speed it up. Are they making it? They wanted to go by quicker.
Yes.
What's the actual request?
What's real there? I have a feeling it has something more to do with God. I pray that I will be there when day comes, right? Because
that's a great.
They knew that day was going to be there. It was going to, we're going to get to it. And we know that God's not in the he's not in the habit of like speeding up the rotation of the earth on its axis.
It doesn't happen often.
Just doesn't happen often, right?
With Joshua,
maybe sort of, or slowing it down. I don't know,
stops,
something like that. But it's just not something that he does, at least not for every person that prays for that.
Right.
Because that would get really difficult.
Have you ever? I've prayed that prayer.
Yes,
I've prayed that prayer, lying in bed, couldn't sleep.
I have.
Whether it's, anxious or even in the, out in the wilderness, can't get comfortable, hearing sounds, going, okay, I've prayed that prayer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Lord, just let it be daylight. Please.
Yeah.
Please let me see that sun start to creep up on the horizon. Please, Lord.
Yep. And so here, and I've prayed that too. In fact, you'll have to get onto the Daily Fill podcast on Friday. You'll hear the story. I should tell it as quickly as I can. I think I went to 600 words this week, but anyway, shame. So, or you can get that via email on our website. You'll have to hear that story. You'll have to do that. But here was the point that I thought, what I caught in this, what I saw, is that these guys, bless their hearts, I'm glad they're praying, right?
Yeah,
and it's not a bad prayer to say, hey, I want to live. That's a good prayer. But I think the better prayer is actually not God, fix this, but God, would you be here with me in this? Because
Mhm.
that is a prayer that he will answer.
It is.
That's the prayer that will actually help in some sense. God, will you show yourself in this storm? Will you be there with me in the midst of the storm? And really what you're praying for though is God to give me direction.
Right.
You know, that this is the idea.
Yep. Give me awareness of your presence and the allow your spirit to work in me. Give me the faith to follow.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
So
absolutely.
Well,
Okay.
that's sort of that was the essence of the message. I didn't have time to talk about this. So is this an okay time?
This is an okay.
The very last verse of the last two verses of Acts
of the book of Acts.
Some of my favorites because of where you just go, hey, I have about 1,000 questions, right? So
which is so true about a lot of the Bible.
Yes.
That's okay.
It is.
Okay.
It is. But
yes.
Yeah. And you even go, okay, there's something I'm not seeing. And welcome to the party. It's verse 30 and 31. He's this is speaking of Paul. He is finally in Rome and he's in jail.
Yeah.
Okay. House arrest, probably. It says he lived there 2 whole years at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. And you go, okay, some other translations say the gospel moved forward without hindrance.
Yep.
Right. And I would think that jail would be hindrance. And yet
that's on my list of hindrances. Yes.
And yet without hindrance, as if to say, oh, come on. Like Paul being in jail cannot stop the progress of the gospel. It can't even stop the progress of the gospel through Paul.
Yeah.
And I love that passage of scripture. Not only that, but what is Paul's message? He's proclaiming the kingdom of God. That's his message. That's the same message Jesus proclaimed. So a lot of people want to sort of pit Paul and Jesus against each other and say they preach different gospels. When Jesus preached the gospel is the kingdom of God is at hand. When Paul preached the gospel, it was something different. But at the very end of Acts, Paul is saying, at the end of his life, what's Paul's message? The kingdom of God. The kingdom of God. Same message as Jesus and teaching about the Lord Jesus with all boldness. I just love that picture that the storms in life, they cannot hinder the progress of the gospel in our lives or through our lives, that God is still at work and he's still on the move and without hindrance. I love that.
I know. That is such a unique passage. He lived there for 2 years. And Luke writing this seems to be suggesting that something happened after 2 years, but he just didn't get to that.
Come on, Luke.
I know. Now, okay, this is fun. This is all.
I hear a conspiracy theory coming.
Conspiracy theories coming, right? Because the book of Acts and the book of Luke are about the same length, and
they are.
And they say it's about what would fit on a scroll, right? So some have suggested that Luke was planning on another scroll, that maybe even started another scroll, that this was the end of that one. And had, maybe he started another scroll. He seems to imply that there was more to the story.
Right.
And we don't know. And so some people think that Paul died here. Some people think he went on, if there's believers in Spain who will say he made it to Spain.
Right.
But we don't.
Who knows?
We don't really know that. And we don't at all. But I just love that he leaves us here.
Yeah.
Here with a guy who is, like you said, the gospel is unhindered, even though by all of our standards, Paul is in a bad place.
Yes.
Right? Because, I guess the odds are, maybe is the more prevailing view is that he died there.
Right. Yeah.
That he died in Rome, and that was it.
Yep.
And yet, the gospel even continued without Paul.
Without hindrance.
And
I love that.
Continued today. That's really cool. That's great. I love that.
I love Carolyn's point here too, that she points out we wouldn't have the letters Paul wrote if he hadn't been where he was during that time. That these
So
prison
right.
epistles that we have,
Especially,
right?
yep,
That
yep.
of him encouraging these churches and writing these letters. Yeah, she's right.
Yeah.
She's right.
Yeah, that's so great. And yeah, especially those that, from Rome. Here he's in the center of the world.
Yeah.
At the time,
Yeah.
the known world. And somehow he's able to live in prison at his own expense, which that's some weird system that they had, I'm sure.
Mhm.
It's different than ours, of course, but welcoming all. So this is some kind of prison that he can, and maybe it's the same kind of thing that here he is in another storm. And just like on the boat,
Yep.
he proved himself to be faithful. He proved himself to be wise, and he proved himself that he wasn't going to run away, all those things. So maybe just like Joseph way back in Genesis, right? Just like so many people, they earned a right to be allowed freedom.
Yep.
I'm guessing
so
something like that.
One of my last points was that the storm is never the end of the story. That was my sort of wink and nod to this text to say, like, yeah, even jail, it's the gospel's still unhindered.
Mm-hmm.
And the storm is never the end, in our lives or through our lives. So there it is.
How much of things in our life do we assume that if I don't just do this, if I don't make this, if I don't say the right thing, then it's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point, Josh.
As
totally.
If it's relying on us. And I mean, I guess I'll just say it this way. If we're saying it like that, it either is not that important.
Mm-hmm.
It's like something in us, or we're just dead wrong because it will.
Right.
If it's that important.
Or really we're showing our hand as far as the pride that we're holding on to.
Yeah.
Like, okay, this depends wholly and solely on me. I think God would go, does it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
yeah. 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 So yeah, Patty's saying that so much turbulence this time. We've been through many. I believe I have no idea how God is involved, how God is continuing to write that story, right? In their lives. Finding hope is hard sometimes, and loss and hardships.
Yeah.
I know many suffered through and believe, and many who don't. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. It has been hard for us.
It's been a stormy 14, 16 months. Yeah.
But that would be a good question to ask. How's God MacGyvered this storm? How has God MacGyvered COVID for you?
I mean, I think of those first two, even just for our church corporately, right? Yeah. The clarifying of priorities, the direction. I mean, there's some new things that we had to do because of COVID that even as a staff, the way that we go, the way that we work, the way that we work together, some of our worship services. I mean, there's a lot of directional things that God did in the midst of the storm, right? I even think of, family life. There was things that he did as far as clarifying priorities. I can't tell you how many conversations I had with people who told me I had no idea how busy we were until we stopped it all. And my fear is that we'll just go back to, now that we're back open in California, right? That we'll just go back to how it was before. That's why we wanted to do this series, Not So New, Not So Normal, to say, like, getting back to normal may not be the goal. Yes. Maybe there's something better. And so that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah. And in some ways that, because everybody talks about the new normal. And maybe, hopefully, what that new normal is maybe it's not so new.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe it's quite old, right? That's the idea, right? That's why Acts especially was a great choice for this, because it is the early church, and so these are lessons for the church throughout all the centuries. So maybe our new normal is not so new, and yet at the same time, it's as Christians, we shouldn't be pushing for normal, should we?
Right? No.
No, we should be very different. Well, you guys, man, that's good. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, that's my drum roll. I need a song or something. That didn't work. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our second segment of Ryan Brought a Book.
All right, Josh. So this one I read actually before After Doubt. So
okay.
I'll have another one for next week that I'm reading right now. Actually, the one I'm reading right now, I don't know if it's appropriate for. It's not like a romance novel or anything.
You're gonna have to tell us. I mean,
it's a book called Splankna, and it's about what I would suggest is a potentially controversial approach to therapy that is Christian in its essence, but has some different types of practices. Anyway, so I'd love to actually, I'll talk about it at some point and sort of give my take. I just don't know what my take is yet. Yeah, I'm like 95% through it. I'm going, there's some things here that sound very, very true. I actually know they're true. And then there's some gray area where I'm going, I'm not sure I'm comfortable in this gray area yet. So, all right. But this book, this was awesome. All right, you guys. So here's the book for this week. It's called A Burning in My Bones. It's by Wynne Collier. And it is a biography of Eugene Peterson.
Love it.
And I've always loved Eugene Peterson. I read his autobiography, The Pastor, about 9 years ago and loved it. I think I liked this one a little bit more.
Did you?
It was a little bit less verbose. In his, he went down some rabbit trails where I was like, that's a lot of details about that. This one stayed at a little bit of a higher level. And a few things that stood out to me about Eugene.
Okay.
Number one, I had forgotten that he was a really good athlete. And college, ran in college, etc. I love that there were some seasons where he really struggled. And there was a season where he wanted to get out of his church in Maryland so bad that he sent out a number of letters to other churches to say, I'm interested in leaving. And I forget how long the period was, but it was at least a year. I have in my head 3 years, but I think that's too long to live in that type of a liminal space. But can you imagine being one of the churches that said no to Eugene Peterson?
I was thinking that somebody out there is like read this and be like,
oh, that's us.
We did it. I can't believe we did that. We chose that guy. No.
Yes. So if you're unfamiliar with Eugene, my guess is you are more familiar than maybe you think because he wrote the Bible. I'm just kidding. He translated the Message paraphrase, and it's most people would say it's not a translation in the sense of that he's going word for word, and it's not a transliteration where he's taking idea for idea, which the NIV is a transliteration, the NASB's translation.
Yes,
we could do that. So this is more of a paraphrase. So he's not translating just idea by idea, but more like he'll translate a whole pericope of thought into sort of modern vernacular. Yeah, and it's a great paraphrase.
It's been a resource that so many people have used.
And, there was a number of publishers that said no to it originally. But he started with Galatians, and he wrote Galatians just for his church. And he just wanted his church to fall in love with the scriptures. There's this whole section in the book about him, about Bono from U2, really falling in love with the Psalms in the Message paraphrase version, and Bono reached out to Eugene
This is so cool.
as the, his the lead singer of U2, and Eugene says, "Who's U2?"
Yeah, I've heard that. That is the greatest, because here this guy is. He's written the Bible. Okay, all right. He's written a version of the Bible that is so well known, right? It is one of the most used, definitely the most used paraphrase or that kind of translation. And I believe, am I right to say that he never pastored a church over 500 people?
Yeah, that's true.
And oftentimes it's 300 people, really quite small.
Yeah,
where he would know everybody's name.
Yep.
He would know the families. This is the kind of pastor he was. And I love that he didn't care about who Bono was.
He didn't care.
That's so great.
He was very uncomfortable with the spotlight. And not because he was shy or an introvert. He was an introvert. And actually, I loved the honesty in this book of him at times struggling even just to share his heart with his wife, because he was he sort of played things close to the vest, even in his marriage. And the second half of his life was spent really investing in his marriage and like working on being more open with his wife, who he loved dearly and was faithful to, and all those things. But he knew there's a level of intimacy that I haven't been willing to go to, even with her.
Yeah.
And so one of my favorite parts about this book was at the very end of Eugene's life. He, there were some cognitive decline towards the very, very end, but he really started to catch some flack shortly before that for essentially not playing the Christian publisher game. And by that I mean avoiding people or topics that are taboo and that will lose you a reader base.
Right. Yes.
And so just my personal opinion, I totally I disagree with much of what Rob Bell wrote in his book Love Wins, right? And I read it, and there were some things where I go, I see the point he's making, but his thesis for the whole book, I go, I'm not there. Like, I don't believe in an inclusivist view of eternity. I believe that you're saved only by the blood of Jesus and by faith in Jesus. And so the book suggested something else, but Eugene actually did an endorsement for Love Wins. I had forgotten that. And he didn't agree with everything in it either.
No.
And he got lambasted for it. And wanting to be a voice that helps people wrestle with these ideas, which he was very familiar with after, paraphrasing the entire Bible.
Yeah.
And he wanted people to think and dialogue and sort of get out of these us versus them trenches that we've dug so deeply. And the pain that he walked through, not just because of that, but other situations similar to that towards the end of his life, I went, gosh, that is, it was saddening to see that towards the very end of his life, that was part of the way that his story ended.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that is interesting. And that kind of thinking is needed.
Yeah. I mean, I think to say, I remember, I was asked, at one point by a group of people, what do you think of Love Wins? And I said, oh, have you read it? And they said, no. And I went, oh, well, I'd love to talk to you about it. Totally. Right. But I think you should read it.
Yeah.
And there was such an aversion to just reading it.
Yep.
Where I went, no, like, we need to enter into the ideas in order to be able to dialogue about them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I'm with you there. And Eugene, as Carolyn points out, he gets a hard time for his paraphrase. People will say, like, it's not a real translation or something like that. But she makes a great point that people don't know, that he was a professor of Hebrew and Greek, that, like, at least he was incredibly close to. He had planned to continue as a professor rather than become a pastor.
Yep.
That guy knew more Hebrew and Greek than than I ever will.
Yeah, he
right?
forgot more than
he's forgotten
I've
more.
ever learned. I mean, he was brilliant and
Absolutely
a poet.
brilliant. Totally.
And that's you put those two things together,
Yes.
and that's why his paraphrase has been wildly popular.
Yes, and his wisdom in the book, The Pastor, about to any pastor out there, anyone wanting to be a pastor. Yes, it can be long and a little bit goes some places that whatever, but there's some incredible advice. He's challenged me in so many ways with that book.
If you're a pastor and you're looking to read Eugene,
yeah,
number one, do it. But for pastors, which is The Contemplative Pastor, 5 Smooth Stones, and Under the Unpredictable Plan.
Yeah.
And those are just phenomenal works on the role of pastor.
Absolutely.
Okay, Gwen, it's called Splankna.
Oh yeah. So the books that we referenced, Splankna, he's going to add into the Facebook comments there, and then A Burning in My Bones, and what a great line, by the way. That's that is Eugene's story, and we're and with that, we're probably getting to be about time here. So thank you, everybody. And thank you for bringing a book, Ryan. That was the second edition of our segment.
Ryan brought a book.
Ryan brought a book.
Yes.
Yes, we'll keep doing that.
Yeah.
And in fact, so we're gonna have to figure out when. It may not be for we may not be able to do this again for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But we'll jump back in as soon as we
2 weeks. Then here's a teaser.
Okay.
I picked up a copy of a guy named Preston Sprinkle, his book called Embodied.
Yes.
And it's on transgender issues and the church and how we can engage that. And so I'll do my best to finish it by then, and we can have a talk about it.
I love it. That'll be an interesting talk. I may get it right now and try to.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fun.
Try to catch up to you with that.
Ryan and Josh brought a book. I haven't started it yet. So
you're gonna bring a book. Okay.
All right.
Well, everybody, thank you, Ryan. Thanks so much for diving into these storms, and wherever you are, in a storm, out of a storm, and here's the bummer part: we're all at some point going to go into a storm, right?
Yeah, we are.
And so, I think wherever you are in that, whether you're looking forward and thinking, oh, I think this often, oh God, I hope a storm's not coming.
Yeah.
But we know it will. And so hopefully this can give you some hope to weather the storm well.
I hope it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, God bless. Thanks again for spending some time with us.
Yeah. Have a great night. Yeah. God bless.